All rise. S'il vous plaît. Veuillez vous asseoir.
I think it's now turn of Mrs. Massidda, if I've understood it correctly.
Indeed, Your Honor. Thank you. Good afternoon. Mr. President, Your Honors, the armed conflict between the government of Uganda and the LRA, described as the worst forgotten humanitarian crisis in the world, was exceptionally protracted and brutal in its impact on the civilian population. Prior to the LRA insurgency, people in northern Uganda lived a peaceful life. When community members are asked about their lives before the conflict broke out in 1986, they describe it as very pleasant. Life was peaceful, and they were free to go about their daily business. People in northern Uganda lived their lives with a comfortable reassurance that they knew what tomorrow would look like. After the LRA insurgency began, nearly 2 million northern Ugandans were forced to abandon their often self-sufficient homesteads for a life confined in internment camps, dependent on food assistance. A survey report released in July 2003 revealed that at least 1,000 people, mainly children, were dying in the camps every week. The high concentration of people in the IDP camps made the population more vulnerable and harder to protect from the LRA incursions. The protection of the camps remained precarious, and life became a daily struggle for survival. The LRA frequently attacked the camps, partly because CONI perceived the victims as loyal to or supporting the government by reason of the fact that they were confined in areas under the protection of UPDF, and partly because CONI needed to recruit soldiers and wives for his army. The attacks were well planned and well executed, following a standard modus operandi which aimed at targeting on one side the UPDF forces and the civilians on the other side. Victims of the attack generally recall their experience as follows, and I quote, Your Honors, from one of our clients. I quote, "All around, there were killings going on, and so much fire burning that the entire place became so bright as it was broad daylight. By the time they left, the whole camp was littered with dead bodies, as if they had been on a hunting spree. They killed people as if they were hunting animals." End of quote. The broad geographical spread of victimization and the large number of victims participating in this case, 4,106 individuals, confirm the wide scope of the attack. Families and communities of all ages and gender suffer from crimes in northern Uganda. The victims of the attack's account of events reveal that the crimes they suffered from were not spontaneous nor isolated acts of violence, but rather part of a plan, directed and organized attack against them because they are Acholi and perceived as supporting Museveni's government. The attack was perpetrated over a long period of time. The victims recall a particular pattern of the LRA in attacking IDP camps and put emphasis on the crime of pillaging, explaining that the LRA took everything they owned, including all goods necessary to sustain life in the difficult conditions in northern Uganda: pants, caps, clothes, as well as livestock, representing the key source of income of the affected people. Often, victims had compiled detailed lists of the items looted. According to the victims' account of events, some murders were motivated by the desire to oppress the resistance or by the desire to appropriate cattle belonging to the inhabitants of the camps. After completing their operations, usually the rebels departed, taking with them an unspecified number of men, women, children, foodstuff, and other valuables. An estimated 30,000 children, mainly from the Acholi sub-region, have been abducted and conscripted as child soldiers and rebel wives. During the decades of armed conflict in northern Uganda, the LRA systematically abducted girls for the purpose of forcibly marrying them to commanders and fighters. Abductions were normally perpetrated during the attacks. The majority of abducted girls were forced into marriage and given to LRA commanders and higher-ranking fighters. Top commanders would even describe the type of girl they wanted, including age, physical appearance, and intelligence. If recent abductees matched these desired characteristics, then they were collected and distributed to the commanders. It was then an order to go with those men and become their wives. And resistance was punishable by rape, severe beating, torture, or even death. Once the senior commander selected the girls they wanted, then the lower-ranking fighters would be given a wife from the ones remaining. The use of the label wife, the forced imposition of the status of marriage, causes a unique psychological suffering which often leads to stigmatization and rejection of the victims by the families and the community. Forced marriage also inflicts grave physical injury and results in long-term moral and psychological suffering of the victims. Victims themselves indicate that their condition of wife had and still have serious repercussions on their possibility of restoring, as they put it, normal relations with men. And that even if they are reintegrated in the community, they feel that said reintegration is not, to use again their words, full, and sometimes only dictated by social conventions more than by a genuine will to help them in rebuilding their lives. The LRA method of warfare has had a profound psychological impact on the local population. LRA rebels use extreme violence to instill fear and maintain control. The severity of attacks appeared to come in waves, with major massacres interspersed across an ongoing campaign of low-intensity, small-scale assaults. LRA rebels mutilated, abducted children and adults, and committed rape and other acts of sexual violence against girls and women. The LRA routinely cut off lips, ears, and breasts, and amputated limbs. Many of these mutilations were carried out to prevent betrayals. Adults were abducted to help carry looted goods, but usually released after a short period of time. Not the same fate for children. The LRA favored the abduction of very young children because more malleable. Once abducted, children were conscripted as soldiers, porters, and sexual slaves. Children were often forced to commit atrocities as soon as they were abducted in order to make a clean break. Children were considered an asset to the LRA because they can walk quickly and do not tire easily. If they slow down or are unable to keep up, they were killed, or first mutilated and then killed. The LRA also favored the abduction of pre-adolescent girls because believed to be free of sexually transmitted diseases. The younger girls were subject to long hours of exhausting domestic work, walking long distances to fetch water and firewood, cooking, cleaning, and working in the fields. They were systematically raped. The horrific and prolonged consequences of the war had an impact not only on the individuals, but eroded the solid and rich culture of the Acholi society. Mr. President, Your Honors, the extent of the prejudice suffered from by the civilians in northern Uganda is tremendous. Experience of forced conscription into the LRA varies in scope and intensity, but is considered to be extremely traumatic. Children, some as young as 6 years old, have been forced to mutilate and kill civilians, including members of their own families and communities. LRA abductees have had severe violence inflicted upon them: beatings, imprisonment, forced labor, and witnessing killings. Several studies indicate that former abductees who have committed or experienced high level of violence show substantial increases in emotional distress as well as poor family relations. Symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and depression were found to be significantly higher among those who experienced abduction compared to the ones who only witnessed violence or had little exposure to the conflict. Reports also show that women experience a long average stay in captivity than men. Women aged 19–30 years old average 4.5 years in abduction, more than the average of any other age gender group. This finding reflects the LRA practice of abducting girls and women to serve as sexual partners and servants to LRA commanders. Recent studies also find that a quarter of all females abducted for any length of time were forcibly married to members of the LRA, and that half of them gave birth to children conceived following these forced relationships. As the people from the IDP camps returned from displacement and tried to rebuild their lives, they had to struggle with daunting resettlement challenges, in addition to complex questions on how to approach issues of reconciliation between victims and alleged perpetrators within the community. Many war-affected communities in northern Uganda are faced with a similar scenario as they struggle to pick up the pieces of their lives in the wake of a conflict. Characterized by difficulty to cope with their trauma and challenges in pursuit of their justice and reconciliation needs, specifically the need for accountability and reparations. Mr. President, Your Honors, why victims wish to participate at trial? Which are their expectations at the start of a trial? In a short 10-minute video we would like to play now, victims explain with their own words the reasons for their participation and their hopes concerning the proceedings. Before we play the video, Your Honors, for the benefit of the public, I would like simply to make clear that the video has no evidential in nature. It's simply a way to convey the expectation of the victims in the way in which these expectations have been conveyed to us in the field during meetings that we held with our clients. The video will be played completely in English. We simply want to thank, before playing the video, the Registry Language Service section who provided assistance in reviewing the translation from the Acholi. The video will be shown on evidence 2. Victims participating in this case suffer serious mental and physical harms as a result of the attacks perpetrated in Pajule, Odek, Abok, and Lukodi IDP camps. They were also subject to various forms of violence, including persecution and those forced to flee their homes. The majority of them lost at least one or more of their family members. Their properties were pillaged and destroyed. Women and girls were either raped or subject to other sexual and gender-based violence. As a result of rapes, some of them contracted sexually transmitted disease. Others got pregnant and gave birth to children who are in turn stigmatized in their communities. Boys and girls were abducted and forced to become soldiers. Why victims want to participate at trial? Which are the expectations of victims at the start of a trial?
When I think about justice, I mean that I want the truth about the events I suffered from, and like me, many others in Uganda. We want the truth to be established so that we may be satisfied. I want the court to work well with one heart and this case to end in a just manner. I trust the court to dispense justice for us survivors.
I am 69 years old. When the LRA attacked the camp, 3 of my children were killed. I was severely beaten, and 80 of my cows were taken. For this reason, I want my voice to be heard before the court. The court should know that I need justice and reparations for my children who were killed. My mother, my brother, and my sister were killed at the time of the attack. At the time, I was attending school. I wanted to study to assist my country, but I had to stop my studies because of the war. Since my mother was killed, I had to take care of the family. The court should know what really happened to the people here in northern Uganda so that the judges will be able to make a just judgment, and if the perpetrator is guilty, then compensation to the victims could be paid. It cannot be impunity. Nobody is above the law.
My husband was abducted and killed. My house was burned and my property looted. I have problems in paying school fees for my children and in providing them with proper food. We need assistance. In my thinking, the court should make some reparations for us. If justice is done, this will help in avoiding other crimes to be committed again. The sufferings I went through were enormous. Life is hard now. I was abducted as a young girl and forced to become a rebel's wife. When I was back from the bush, I found out that my parents were dead. Every time I mention what happened to me, I feel the trauma and the bad images come back. Even now, I have difficulties with my children in the community. I wish I could live for another place so that I can live in peace with my children. Here, I'm stigmatized because people do not completely forgive us and keep pointing out at us as the ones who are in the LRA. The sufferings I went through can never be compensated, but the court should make us feel that justice is done, so that we can live knowing that justice exists.
When the LRA attacked the camp, I was 7. They took my uncle, who was taking care of me, and he never returned. So I have been left alone. I think that the court should help us in reconstructing our lives.
On 19th May 2004, the LRA attacked the camp. My children were killed. I saw it and it was very painful. God willing, the person who did this to us should face justice. I have trust in the court to support us and understand what happened to us. I wish to participate in the proceedings before the court to tell what happened to me and many of my friends and neighbors when the camp was attacked. My grandchild was killed with no pity. The houses were pillaged and burned. One of my sons disappeared, and I have no news about him since. I have no doubt that the court will dispense justice, but justice alone will not suffice to restore our lives. We also need assistance to be able to give a future to our children. Coming back from the market, I heard gunshots and I saw houses put on fire. There were a lot of dead people on the ground. My daughter, who was 6 years old, was abducted. My mother was seriously beaten. I trust the court because otherwise, how we could still hope that justice will be done. I want my voice to be heard because I suffered a lot. At the time of the attack, my child, who was only 3 months old, was killed. They threw her against a banana plant. My house was looted, and I had to carry my goods for the rebels. The court should help me get justice. The person who committed the crime should face judgment so that the truth will be known. I was at the market near the mango tree when the attack began. I went back home to check for my 1-year-old child. Because of the gunshots, I had to flee, leaving my family behind. It was the most painful experience of my life. For this, I want justice. I want to see the perpetrator punished. I was returning from collecting water when I saw smoke and heard gunshots. I ran home where I found that one of my children had been killed and some members of my family abducted. I do not think that there is any way of repairing what happened to me and the other people in the camp. Only justice could make us feel alive again, knowing that the person who did the wrong will be recognized guilty and will pay for the sufferings caused. Many people were killed, many were abducted, and others never came back. Young girls were abducted and they came back with children. Children were murdered. I believe my voice will ensure that justice is done, and it will help me to forget the sufferings I went through. The court should dispense justice. I want the truth, something that can give hope to the people. If there is justice and people are satisfied with the whole process, it will be good. I lost 2 of my children. My mother was abducted and my house was destroyed and pillaged. I trust the court will help us in finding who committed the crime. This will help us in forgetting the sufferings we went through and alleviate the wounds we have in our hearts. Justice must prevail. God will ensure that justice will prevail.
Victims have been waiting for these proceedings to start for 11 years. They hope to contribute to the search for the truth about the events at the origin of their victimization and to have their voice heard throughout the proceedings. They expect an independent, impartial, transparent, and efficient justice, capable of addressing their sufferings. Justice shall prevail. 3 simple words, Your Honor, which rightly convey the expectation of victims at the start of a trial. This concludes our opening on their behalf. Thank you for listening to their voices today.
Thank you very much.